Hey team, Jen here. I am making this post today just to share some thoughts with you about the second part of the prompt for this week, in which you're asked to tell me a bit about your thoughts concerning history. Now, when it comes to history, that's a really huge thing. Don't you feel like you could write a whole treatise just on your ideas about history? Well, I could too. And I want to talk a little bit about what I find most perplexing whenever I think about history. Of course, I think that as graduate students, most of us come to the table with this sense that history is not all inclusive, right? I think most of us have probably read enough fictional and non-fictional texts to walk away with the sense that there's always stories that aren't being told in the normal scope of a historical event, right? There's gray area within or laying outside that black and white, and it's the gray area that intrigues me the most. And probably intrigues you as well, although there definitely is a draw to the black and white. But when you think about that gray area, it's very chaotic. And if we start to think about history as mainly that gray area. So, for example, the stories from the Native Americans themselves, or reading Navajo creation myths as a very important part of American history. How does that change our perception of America? How does it change our perception of history and historicizing? So I think that the gray area offers us a lot of question marks in terms of what history is and what it means. A lot of people are taught in grade school, problematically so, in my opinion, that there is a true and correct way to view historical events. Um, so, for example, if you're looking at the Civil War or you're looking at the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, then there's a correct way to answer that standardized testing question on your test that you get, right? There's no room to kind of challenge the history there. So as you become graduate students, you start to I think open up that Pandora's box and you start to say, well, maybe the way that we understand history isn't really correct. Maybe history isn't real. And that brings you to a conundrum, I think. At least it does for me. In that, what is the value of history? If we think about history as gray matter, where there's a lot of question marks and possibly only question marks, in hearing stories from the subalterns or the others who are a part of that historical experience, but whose stories and voices are more silenced. If we start to value those voices, then what does that mean for how we understand history? Does it mean that we ought to think about history as question marks? And if we do that, then what does that mean for that very famous mantra that we like to articulate here in America that if you don't learn from your past, you're destined to repeat it, right? So we have this idea that there's some nugget of truth to be taken from history. Um, is that still true when you start to think about history as gray and as questions? What nugget exactly are we supposed to be pulling from that that's going to help us to that's going to prevent us from repeating some of those mistakes? And also, how do we read historical mistakes when those mistakes are gray? Um, you know, yeah, it brings up so many interesting questions for me. Um, Even if you think about history in the context of your own life, even just thinking, I'm just going to think about my own life, the history of my experiences, there's so much gray matter there. For example, I keep journals. I kept a journal since I was 6, and I can go back and read those journal entries, and even my memories become false. Even my memories become gray. Even my experience in the moment is a question mark. It's I have various perspectives that I can take. It's almost like there's a subaltern or there's an other inside of me. And when you come to reflecting on your own past experiences, it becomes cloudy, it becomes questionable, it becomes to use the word again, very gray. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about what the value of history is if we see history in this way. I look forward to hearing your thoughts.